Chapter 6. Sammy had her arms wrapped around him, and she sat in Barry's lap. They were kissing one another for all they were worth. As they kissed, she heard an incessant beeping that she ignored, at first. After a bit, she lifted her head. The soup. She jumped off his lap and ran into the kitchen. It's not burning. I am, Barry mumbled. He took deep gulping breaths, trying to calm his raging libido. I'm sorry, she said, hating that she'd run from him so quickly, but she hated when something was scorched into a pan. It had happened more than once while she delivered babies, and it was so hard to clean up. He walked to the other side of the counter where she was cooking, leaning on it. What would it take to talk you into marrying me? He asked. He hadn't quite realized the words were about to pop out of his mouth, but he was glad when they did. At first, her heart skipped a beat, but then Sammy laughed, stirring the thickening for the soup. We've known one another for what? 5 days? Time to marry. I'm serious, Sammy. I've never felt this much for anyone, and I don't know that I can keep seeing you like this. Not without dragging you off to bed, and I don't think that's who you are. She frowned. It's not who I am. I've never, not before marriage. That's what I thought. So, let's get married. Tomorrow. What's the waiting period in Wyoming? Barry looked so serious, Sammy almost believed he meant it. If you'd lived here more than a few months, you'd know the answer. There is no waiting period. Everyone is running around getting married in 3 hours around here. It's absolutely crazy. She stirred the thickening into the soup and brought it to a boil, turning down the heat. Walking to the fridge, she removed the grated cheese and put some bacon on a microwave bacon tray, covering it with a paper towel. Do you want butter and sour cream? Yes, but listen to me. I'm not kidding. Marry me. Tomorrow. We can't get married just because we can't keep our hands off each other. That would be crazy. Where would we be in 6 months after the passion wore off? Sammy tried to talk sense into him, but she wasn't sure if she was convincing him or herself. She so badly just wanted to agree and let the chips fall where they may. The passion isn't going to wear off. I guarantee it. You can't. After 5 days' acquaintance, you're that certain we should be married? Really? He nodded. I am that certain. Please, Sammy, marry me. She frowned. I have appointments all day. There's no time to plan a wedding. Sure, there is. You can get all the women whose babies you've delivered involved. I'm sure there are dresses for the borrowing. Come on. It won't hurt anything. And you said you wanted me to see a wedding performed by Brother Anthony? What better wedding than our own? She laughed. He had no idea what he was getting into there. If I said yes, you'd freak out. No, I wouldn't. Barry shook his head. Look, I've lived the wild nomadic life. I came here to Culpepper to settle down. I wanted to own my own store and hopefully find a woman to marry and have children with. You are my destiny. I closed my eyes and pointed on a map, and Culpepper is the place that I pointed to. This is where Providence brought me. So you're saying we're fated to marry, because this is the town you poked on a map with your eyes closed? Sammy wondered if she shouldn't call in a psychiatrist. The man sounded like he was losing his mind. He shook his head. That's not all there is to it, and you know it. I believe we're meant to be together. Marry me, Sammy. She stared at him for a moment, thinking about it. Finally, she nodded. All right. I'll marry you. Tomorrow? He pushed. You really can't quit while you're ahead, can you? She bit her lip, thinking. I do think it would be a good idea for me to wait until after Tabby's baby is born. I'm going to be the only one on call in town for babies for a little while. Tomorrow. Before her baby is born. Please don't make me wait. You're beginning to remind me of a toddler who has to get his own way. I'm determined to get my way. Come on. Brother Anthony sounds like he's always ready to perform a wedding. She finally nodded. All right. I'll make calls during my lunch tomorrow, but that means you need to bring me food for lunch. I'm not going to be running all over town making calls while I get my taco burger. I'll bring you a taco burger and cheese curds. She used a ladle to put food in 2 bowls, handing one to him. I really think this is a weird arrangement, but I'll go with it. She wasn't sure what else to do, and she longed to spend the night in his arms. Surely that meant it would work out between them. While they ate, she made a list of all the people to call. She decided not to invite either parent. If she invited her dad and Adam, her mother would be uncomfortable around them. If she invited her mother, then her dad and Adam would be angry. No, she'd just get married without either of them. As long as Tabby was there, everything would be just fine. As soon as she put her pencil down, he took her hand in his. You've made me the happiest man alive today. You've made me a nervous wreck. I hope we can meet in the middle somewhere. He laughed. I'm sure that's absolutely possible. It'll just take a little time. Yeah. Time. She sighed, picking the pencil back up. How could she forget to invite Linda and Roy? The older couple had finally tied the knot, leaving the Culpepper house to Carlin and Hope as they settled into Roy's house in town. She needed to find a dress, call Brother Anthony, or maybe she'd call Lovey, and figure out flowers and a cake. Thankfully, Grace knew to keep a wedding cake made up at all times. All she had to do was decorate it. It was Culpepper, after all. Asterisk. The following day was absolutely crazy. Sammy made calls between patients, and again during her lunch. At noon on the dot, Barry showed up with her lunch from Bob's. He had brought a taco burger of his own, and he sat and watched her make phone calls as he ate it. The half of the conversation he heard with Brother Anthony fascinated him more than a little. Brother Anthony? I was hoping to get Lovey. Pause. Yes, I really need you, but she's easier to talk to about these things than you are. Pause. Yes, that's exactly what I'm going to ask you. Sammy held the phone away from her ear. Yes, I know it's ridiculous. Pause. 7 tonight? Pause. That sounds great. Thanks, Brother Anthony. Oh, in case you didn't know, this is Sammy Ross. Pause. See you this evening. Thanks. He stared at her in confusion. That was not your typical conversation with a clergyman. No, but it was a pretty typical Brother Anthony conversation. I really cannot wait to meet this man. It's going to be amazing. She looked at the next person on her list. Dallas. She'd text her instead of calling. As she worked her way down the list, Barry sat quietly, amazed at all she was able to accomplish with just her phone. So many people were banding together to make their wedding a reality. Felicity? May I borrow your wedding dress? Pause. Oh, well, do you think she'd mind if I borrowed it? Pause. Oh, she borrowed it, too? Do you know whose wedding dress it was originally? Pause. Great, I'll call her. The wedding is at 7 this evening. Bring a covered dish, because there's no time for a caterer. Then there was hysterical laughter. Barry had to assume it was Felicity on the other end of the line, but the woman sounded positively deranged. Finally, Sammy shut the ringer on her phone off and tucked the phone back into her pocket. I have an appointment in 5 minutes, so I need to get back. She walked him to the door, leaning into him and kissing him. See you in a few hours. I'll be the one in white. Unless, the dress has been dyed and made into a prom dress, and no one was really sure about that. He chuckled. You need to talk to people other than Felicity. I know. I like her, but she confuses the snot out of me. She kissed him once more and closed the door right in his face as she ran for the clinic. If she made it through the day, it would be a miracle, and everything would be better. She just knew it. All of her afternoon patients had already heard when they came in. Yes, of course you're invited to the wedding, she said over and over to the good ladies of Culpepper. They would have 200 people there on less than 24-hour notice, and she didn't even care. They were all bringing covered dishes, and that was what really mattered. Finally, she turned the closed sign on the door and went into her house. The wedding dress had been delivered, as she requested, and she opened the box, saying a silent prayer it wasn't pink. She didn't have time to start calling around for another dress. She'd wear her sister's, but she was pretty sure that had been borrowed as well. The dress was white. She breathed a sigh of relief as she looked behind her to see Tabby joining her. I'm here to help the bride get ready for her big day. Who has a matron of honor dress for a pregnant woman? Sammy asked, slightly worried. Already taken care of. It's in my old room, and as soon as I get you dressed, I'm going to dress myself. Tabby frowned. I think you made the right decision not inviting Mom or Dad. They never act right when they're around each other. The divorce may have been amicable, but the past few years have not. As long as you're by my side, I think I'll have all the family I'll need. 30 minutes later, they were headed to the church. The church lot was full, and they had to park on the street. You'd think they could leave a spot for the bride and her very pregnant sister, Tabby said with a frown. They probably figured we were already there. Sammy lifted the skirt of her wedding gown high to keep it from trailing through a huge snowdrift. Don't fall. I can't help you up, and there's no way you'd be able to get to your feet in that get-up. A man who looked vaguely familiar to Sammy stopped beside her and offered his arm. I would love to escort my future sister-in-law into the church. Then you won't fall. Help my sister, too, would you? You've got 2 arms. She grinned at him as he offered his other arm to Tabby. It's nice to meet you, Bart. Are you going to move to town and help Barry with the bookstore? I'm considering. He had a gouge above one eye, and his pupils looked a little dilated to Sammy. Have you seen a doctor for that concussion yet? She asked. He shook his head. No time. I'd like you to meet my sister, Dr. Tabitha O'Donnell. She can look at it before the wedding if you are willing. He grinned. I see Barry found the right family to marry into. I'd love it if you'd look at my concussion, Dr. O'Donnell. Tabby narrowed her eyes. Did you drive here with a concussion? Do you have a death wish? He shrugged. Not really, but you have to have at least a bit of a death wish to do the rodeo circuit. As soon as we get into the church, you're going to sit down and let me look at that. The church has a first aid kit that will have to be good enough for the circumstances. Bart looked at Sammy. Is she always this bossy? Sammy shrugged. She's the older sister, and she's a doctor. I think the 2 things combined mess with her head. Tabby ignored them as they made their way to the church like some sort of 3-headed monster, fighting their way through the snow. As soon as they were inside, Tabby sent Sammy for the first aid kit, and while everyone else watched and waited, Bart was given the most thorough exam possible under the circumstances. When she was done, Tabby crossed her arms over her chest. I don't suppose I can talk you into going to the hospital in Laramie. I have to be the best man. Tabby sighed. And I'm the matron of honor. Walk me down the aisle, so I can watch you and make sure you don't fall over. You have the best ideas, Doc. As they walked to the front, Sammy took deep breaths and pretended everyone was seeing her in her wedding gown for the first time instead of watching her play nurse to her sister's doctor for the past 10 minutes. She slowly walked down the aisle to the music Lovey was playing on the church's organ. When she reached the front, Brother Anthony sighed. You always were one for making grand entrances, Samantha Ross. I remember the time you brought a kitten to church hidden in your dress. No one could figure out why you did such a thing, but you were so proud of yourself. Well, until the kitten got away and jumped from pew to pew, scaring all the old ladies in the whole church. Who are you calling an old lady? Lovey yelled out the question. Not you, my beautiful bride. Brother Anthony cleared his throat. Dearly beloved, we are gathered here today for another one of those quick weddings this town has become so very fond of. I think it all started the day those Quinlans came into town, and no one was willing to hurt their feelings and do things differently, so it kept. Tony. Back to the service. Lovey called. Oh, that's right. He cleared his throat again. Dearly beloved, we are gathered here today to join little Samantha Ross and this random bookshop owner whose name I don't know in holy matrimony. At that, Barry couldn't help it as a loud laugh just boomed out of him. This was the special wedding Sammy had said Brother Anthony would perform? Really? It's Barry, sir. Oh, don't bother telling me. I'll forget again later. I only remember Samantha because I've known her since before she could walk. Brother Anthony shook his head. Now, marriage is a bond that is meant to join a man and a woman forever. Do you, book-selling man, take Samantha here to be your lawfully wedded wife? To love, honor, and furnish her with books for the rest of her days? I do, Barry answered. He couldn't help but wonder if the marriage could possibly be legal without his name being used, but no one seemed surprised, so this was probably just how he did weddings. He could see Bart laughing like a hyena, and he grinned happily. This was his new reality. Do you, Samantha, take this bookman to be your lawfully wedded husband? To love, honor, and make babies with for the rest of your natural life? I sure do, Brother Anthony. Sammy stole a peek at Barry and was thrilled to see how terribly amused he looked. He obviously now understood what was so special about Brother Anthony's weddings. Well, then by the power vested in me by God and the glorious state of Wyoming, I do hereby declare you two husband and wife. Go ahead and kiss her, and it'll all be done but the signatures. Barry turned to Sammy and kissed the giggle right off her lips. You could have warned me, he whispered. Why? It was more fun this way, don't you think? He shook his head and turned to face everyone. He glanced over at Bart and saw the butterfly bandages Tabby had used on him. What's wrong with my brother? Concussion. He didn't have time to see a doctor, so Tabby examined him at the back of the church before the wedding. Didn't anyone think that was odd? He asked. People around here are used to Brother Anthony's special weddings. Why would a medical exam faze anyone? Good point. He looked at her in confusion. Do we walk to the back now? We'll just head over to the fellowship hall and see what food is there. Everyone else will follow us. They know where the food is. He shrugged, holding her hand as they walked back down the aisle and toward the fellowship hall. Is this our reception? Yeah. There won't be any drinking or dancing, but we'll have some time to thank everyone for coming and eat. Cut the cake. All that good stuff. Works for me. It's like everyone in town has done a wedding like this before. It seemed like we had them every 3 weeks, like clockwork for a while. Sammy said, hurrying over to look at the cake. Grace makes the most amazing cakes. Isn't it beautiful? It sure is. I can't believe she made it so fast. I'll teach you more about Culpepper as soon as I have some time. For now, just know she's got lots of experience in shotgun weddings. Bart joined them then, holding his hand out to shake Barry's. I found your bride and her sister and assisted them inside, then the sister got all bossy. Barry grinned. I see she did a good job on your concussion. Don't ever drive with a concussion again. Better yet, stay here and don't ever get a concussion again. You don't need that rodeo. Maybe the rodeo needs me. The rodeo will go on with or without you. My bookstore needs you, though. Bart shook his head. You just keep trying, big brother. Don't worry. I will. Chapter 7. Hours later, Samantha grinned at Barry. I think we can sneak away from this now. I was hoping you'd say that soon. He took her hand and ran from the church, heading straight to his truck. Is your truck here? No, I rode over with Tabby. I figured we'd want to leave together. She hadn't been sure about taking her car, but it just seemed to make sense. You figured right. He got in and drove to her place. We never talked about where we'd live, but I figured you'd want to stay with the clinic. You figured right. Where do you live anyway? She couldn't believe she'd just married a man, and she had no idea where he lived. He grinned. There's a small apartment above the bookstore. Seemed to be the perfect place for me. Of course, now I'll have to rent it out. It wasn't much, but it was a good place for someone who needed a temporary home as he had. To Bart? Maybe. What did you think of him? Other than thinking he was reckless to drive with a concussion, I really liked him. He sat quietly while Tabby poked at him, and that's definitely a mark in his favor. She grinned as she remembered how grumpy he'd been while her sister had insisted on bandaging him up. I can see where it would be. He loves books as much as I do. Always wanted to be a mystery writer. We used to sit and write together when we were at the same rodeo. We weren't always, but it was nice. We've always been super close. Well, then whoever is working can write between customers. Or you can take turns working, and whoever is home can write. It sounds like the perfect situation if the store makes enough. She was very excited at the idea of him making his dream come true by writing a novel. Barry frowned. That's the problem. I doubt it will make enough for both of us to survive. We can start those advertising things I suggested. The bakery is willing, and so is Bob. I talked to him at the reception. Thank you. Sammy shrugged. I'm happy to help where I can. I also have an in with the girl who does the radio ads. I could talk to her and see if she'd cut you a break, and we could plan a grand opening kind of thing. Who does the radio ads? She just moved to town a few months ago, but I really like her. Her name is Courtney Raymond. I met her when her sister, who already lived here, had a baby. Then she moved to town a few months later. She's pretty awesome. Sammy vaguely wondered how Courtney and Bart would like each other, but she didn't say anything. Cool. He stopped the truck in front of the clinic. We're finally alone. He gave her his best lecherous look, and she giggled. And I didn't even have to cook, she said enthusiastically. That's the best part about it being my wedding. No cooking necessary. He laughed. Well, I cook some, too. We won't only have a choice of Bob's Burgers or your cooking. I promise. Glad to hear it. I do get called away more than I would like. Babies like to be born at night. I've heard that. Barry said. We'll make it work. He grabbed his suitcase from behind the seat in his truck. I just brought enough clothes for a couple of days. I figure I'll move in slowly. I don't have a renter for the apartment yet anyway. Is that where Bart's staying while he's in town? Yeah. He's been told not to drive for a week. The concussion is worse than he realized. Barry shook his head about his brother driving with a concussion. Tabby was appalled. And we had him help us into the church, and halfway in I noticed the mark above his head and his dilated pupils. She dealt with him, but she was annoyed we'd had him help. It wasn't her fault. It was his. And with a head as thick as my brother's, I'm surprised he was able to get a concussion. Does he get them often? Barry shrugged. It goes with being on the circuit. I've had at least a dozen. He tried to play off the multiple injuries he'd dealt with, even as he worried about his brother going down the same road he had. I can't believe you say that so casually, and I'm thrilled you're not doing that anymore. Me too. Mostly. Sammy frowned at him as she set her purse onto the couch. What do you mean mostly? Do you miss it? She suddenly could picture herself with 2 kids, at home alone, while he was off riding a bronco. It was not a life she wanted for herself or her future children, imaginary or not. Sometimes. It was such a big part of my life for so long. I know I made the right decision when I stopped, but that doesn't mean I don't miss my friends and the crowds. Would you ever go back? He shook his head. No. It wouldn't make sense for me to go back. I'd injure myself again, and it would be all over. If the bookstore doesn't pan out and I can't make enough money from writing, I'll find someone around town looking for a hired hand. I'm pretty darn good with horses and cows. I'm sure you are. You couldn't help but be good with them. I keep telling Bart the same thing. We talked for a bit at the reception, and I told him to work for me part-time and find a part-time job as a cow hand. Wouldn't be nearly as dangerous as staying on the circuit, and we'd be close. Does he have a relationship with his father? Sammy asked. Barry nodded. He does. His dad wouldn't back off when Mom tried to force him to stop seeing Bart. My brother spent every summer with his dad, and I was always so jealous of him for getting to do that. I can see that. You didn't have a dad, and you thought of his father as a dad. You would have had to be very jealous. How long was his dad married to your mom? 3 years, I think. Probably her longest marriage if I think about it. He frowned. No, that was Bob. She was married to Bob for 6 years or so. The whole time I was in high school, and a couple of years more. Was Bob a good man? He shrugged. Sure. He had a ranch, and I got to learn a lot. I didn't mind him. Sammy was a little surprised at how little she knew about this man she'd married. Of course, they'd known one another less than a week. What had she been thinking? He kissed her then, and she remembered exactly what she'd been thinking. She'd been thinking he turned her insides to mush every time he got close to her. She moved closer to him, wrapping her arms around him, thrilled that this time they wouldn't have to stop. She felt his hands on the little buttons on the back of her dress, and she pushed his jacket off his shoulders. Her dress was pulled at her feet when she heard an incessant beeping. She tore away from him. I have to see who's texting. Ignore it. He reached for her again, pulling her back toward him. I can't. It might be a patient. As much as she wanted to ignore it, there was no way she could. He groaned softly, but allowed her to move away from him. She apologized as she read the message. I'm so sorry. With my work, I don't have a choice but to be chained to messages. She read through it. I have a patient on her way. She'll be at the clinic in 5. Baby's on the way. She hurried to him, kissing him softly. Changing into my scrubs, and I'll be back when I can. He nodded, watching her run off. He wondered how much of his married life would be this way. Asterisk. Sammy crawled into bed at just after 7 the following morning. I'm going to get 30 minutes sleep before I have to start my day. I will probably nap through my lunch hour. I can bring you a burger. Barry propped up on one elbow, looking down at his beautifully exhausted wife. She shook her head. I'll be too tired to eat. I keep little snacks at the office, and I'll eat them between patients. I'll be fine. With those words, her eyes were closed, and she was sound asleep. He watched her for a moment before getting out of bed. Hopefully she would get enough sleep and not be exhausted all day. He wanted to make love with her, but not to her detriment. She needed her sleep. Sammy was dragging all day. She was thankful for the nuts and raisin snacks she had hidden in a variety of places around the office. They would keep her going between naps. She had an hour-and-a-half break in the morning between patients, and she took it in her bed, getting up just in time to meet with her next patient. As she'd told Barry she would, she slept through her lunch hour. By the time she got off work, she was ready to climb into bed for the rest of her life. She was sleeping before Barry got home, and he quietly made supper, waking her up to eat it. "I know how tired you are, but you need to eat as well." She nodded, her eyes mostly closed as she ate the omelet he'd made. "I'm sorry. I want to spend time with you, but I need to sleep." He nodded. "I know. By midnight, you'll feel like you again, and we'll spend some time together then." She smiled, wiping her mouth. "Midnight sounds lovely." She walked back into the bedroom and was asleep as soon as her head hit the pillow. At 11:30, he showered and got ready for bed, knowing she'd finally have a little more energy and they could pick up where they left off. Just as he walked into the bedroom, her text notification went off again. She sat up, reaching for her phone. Whatever she read made her jump to attention. "Tabby's in labor. I have just enough time to shower before she gets here. I'm going to be an aunt." Barry sat down on his side of the bed. "Congratulations." Obviously, he'd be waiting a while before anything happened with his new wife, but that was all right. She was going to be an aunt. He climbed into bed and laid on his back, staring at the ceiling. He knew she had to do her job, but he was ready to have a real marriage as well. He closed his eyes, reminding himself that this is what he'd signed up for. She'd told him a few times that emergencies had to come first. This was an emergency. All births were. Sammy delivered her nephew around noon the following day and carefully put him into Dallas's arms. "I can't believe you called a sub just so you could help me with this delivery." "I can't believe you'd be surprised," Dallas returned with a smile. She carefully bathed the baby before laying him in Tabby's arms. "I don't even know what you're naming him," Sammy said. How had her sister never divulged that information? Tabby sighed. "We've been arguing about his name since we found out it was a boy. You'll know as soon as a real decision has been made." "All right. But my nephew cannot be nameless forever." "He won't be. I hope." Sammy washed her hands and cleaned up the room. "I can't believe Arch isn't here. He took that business trip, knowing I wasn't due for 2 more weeks. I called him, and he headed back, but he didn't make it in time." "Well, you did great. I'm excited for you." Sammy kissed her sister's cheek. "I had Angela call everyone to cancel all appointments for today. So, I'm going to get a nap before my husband gets home." "You okay?" Tabby nodded. "I'm going to stay here for another hour or 2. I know what to do." "I know you do. I wouldn't leave anyone else this way." Sammy left the clinic and went back to her house, leaving Dallas in charge. She stripped and climbed into bed, hoping for a few hours of sleep before Barry got home. Asterisk. Barry left work on Wednesday afternoon and went up to his apartment to get more clothes. He couldn't believe he'd been married 48 hours and he still hadn't made love with his new wife. Hopefully the run of deliveries would cool off for long enough for them to consummate the marriage before she had to run off again. Bart was there, still hurting and sleeping most of the time. "You made any decisions yet?" Barry asked. Bart shook his head. "No, but I'm thinking seriously about your offer. If I could find a part-time job helping out on a ranch, I could spend the rest of the time at the bookstore with you, and we could take turns getting our books written. I can give you the names of a few men in the area who might be hiring. I think Sammy would be able to expand on the list if you're really interested." Bart frowned. "Do you miss the rodeo?" "Honestly, I do sometimes, but I'm glad I left. It was breaking me physically." There's no crowd that can cheer loud enough to make that worth it. And I have my bookstore, and now I'm married to Sammy. No, I made the best decision for me. I can't make your decision for you, though if I could, I'd tell you to leave. You don't need to ruin your life with injuries. Bart nodded. I'll consider. I've thought of nothing else during my waking moments since I got here. Well, you probably need to recover from that concussion before you worry about it too terribly much. I agree with that. Bart shook his head. I love my life, but I'll love it more if I'm not constantly worried about dying. Good. Barry got to his feet, his packed bag beside him. Anything you need before I head back? I could run to the store for you. Bart sighed. What I really want is a burger. Are there any good burgers in town? I don't think I could stay on my feet long enough to cook one. I can get you one from next door. There's a place called Bob's Burger Barn. I swear Bob is a genius. Best burgers I've ever had, hands down. Barry frowned at his brother. I'll get you one before I head back. Bart shook his head. If it's next door, there's no driving involved, and I think the fresh air would do me good. I'll head over myself. I'll walk over with you, just to make sure you're steady on your feet. Bart shrugged. You don't have to, but I'd enjoy the company. Give me 5 minutes. As they walked, Barry told Bart about all the different burgers available. Bob was still there when they walked in. Bob usually only worked during the day. Bob, this is my brother Bart. He's craving a burger. Bob grinned. You came to the right place. Barry ordered a couple of taco burgers to go and sat with his brother while they were cooked. You have to try the fried cheese curds, Barry told Bart. They're amazing. I don't even know what that is. It doesn't matter. You just have to try it. Fine, I'll try it. Bart shrugged. Everything on this menu looks amazing. Barry grinned. Well, if you don't mind working with the cows after they're dead, you should get a job as a cook from Bob. He is hiring right now, and you're an excellent cook. Bart frowned. Cooking in a restaurant? I don't know about that. Just until your first book sells. I'll think on it. Bob came then with Barry's to-go order and took Bart's order. Barry slipped out of the booth. See you soon. I may wander down to the bookstore tomorrow. I'm staying awake a little longer at a time as the concussion heals. Sounds good. Barry left, heading to his truck. He wanted to get home with the burgers before Sammy started supper. When he got home, he found his wife in a pair of old pajamas, looking exhausted. She was standing in the middle of the kitchen, looking around as if she was confused. What are you doing? He asked. Trying to figure out what to make for supper. I'm so tired. He smiled, holding up the bag in his hand. I stopped at Bob's. Sammy was ready to cry with relief. And this is why I married you. She took the bag from his hand, grabbed a couple of plates, and took it to the table. How was work? Great. I had my best sales day yet. The bakery didn't wait for a flyer and has been talking me up to locals and visitors. Oh, good. I was hoping they'd start on that soon. She pulled her burger from the bag and put the cheese curds in the middle of the table. How's Bart doing? That's why I went to Bob's. He wanted a burger, so I walked him over. He was pretty amazed at all the different kinds of burgers Bob had available. He took one of the cheese curds and popped it into his mouth. Tabby's baby is okay? She nodded, her eyes lit up. I deliver babies all the time. Not every day, but several a month. And I have to say, there is nothing like delivering a baby that's related to you. I held that little boy and just cried. I'm glad. What did they name him? Sammy shrugged. They hadn't picked out a name yet. I'm sure they'll let me know soon, though. Because I have to put it on the birth certificate. Sounds good to me. He reached out and took her hand in his. I've hated having to sleep without you the past couple of nights. She sighed. I'm sorry I keep running off. I'm going to be delivering double the number of babies now, too, with Tabby being on maternity leave. She shook her head. That's why I suggested waiting to get married until she was back. I'm glad we didn't wait, but I wish you were home a little more. Me too. She finished her meal and leaned back. I'm going to take a shower and get ready for bed. I know it's early, but my sleep has been messed up by all the babies being delivered. I'll be waiting for you, he said, winking at her. I appreciate the waiting. As she walked past him, Sammy kissed his forehead. She did hate that she was called away just when things were getting all hot and heavy between them. At least they hadn't had a chance to get started the night before. After her shower, she walked into the bedroom, and he was sitting on the side of the bed, frowning. What's wrong? She asked. You got a text. She groaned. Are you kidding? This town needs to stop having babies already. He grinned. At least I know it bugs you as much as it does me. She took her phone and glanced at the screen. They're going to be at the clinic in 5 minutes. I need to change into scrubs. She looked down at the frilly nightgown she was wearing. I tried. I know you did. It'll happen. There aren't enough people in this town to have babies every night forever. This is true. The full moon will be over in a couple of days. It always slows down after that. Barry grinned. I thought someone just made that up. Full moons really had an impact on the number of babies born? No, there really are more babies born during a full moon. It's nutty. She grabbed her scrubs and hurried into the bathroom to change. When she was finished, she went back into the bedroom and kissed HM. See you after this baby is born. It's a good thing you love what you do so much. Isn't it? She asked. She ran from the room because she was too tempted to stay with him and make a baby of their own. Her hours had never bothered her before, and now they were getting on her last nerve. She hurried to the clinic and got things ready for the delivery, realizing how much she missed her sister as part of this process. They usually did everything side by side. While she waited for her patient, she called Tabby. What's my nephew's name? Tabby laughed. I think we're naming him Wright. Arch is a big fan of Frank Lloyd Wright, so we're naming him Wright Stephen. I wanted to name him Stephen. Works for me. I'll put it on his birth certificate. How are you feeling? Tired, but good. No problems. If there are any, you know I'll call. Good. Sammy heard the front door. My next delivery is here. Talk to you soon. Let me know if you need me. Don't worry. Even with you delivering today, I won't risk a baby for lack of help. There was a doctor in Haskell they could call as well, but Tabby was closer for emergencies. Sammy certainly would choose the right person to call if it came to that. Love you. Love you, too. Chapter 8. Sammy got home after 8 the next morning. Barry was waiting for her. You all right? She nodded. I'm having my secretary reschedule morning appointments. I'll go in at 1. She was weaving on her feet. She needed sleep more than she needed anything else at that moment. He shook his head. I don't know how you're able to keep going with all this. I have no choice. When Tabby is working as well, we handle things better because we work so closely together. But she's out, too, so I'm going to have to handle it. I'm worried about you. You look exhausted. She nodded. I am. I'm going to grab a bowl of cereal and head back to bed. I'll get up in time for a shower and lunch and see afternoon patients. How can I help? He asked, willing to do anything to take the fatigued look from her eyes. Bring me lunch at noon. I'll eat, shower, and work. But I won't have to cook for myself, and today, I don't know if I can handle cooking for myself or anyone else. Will do. He leaned down and kissed her. I'm heading to work. I will see you at noon with burgers. She nodded, getting herself a bowl of cereal and plopping down at the table to eat it. She rubbed her hands over her face, thankful there had been no complications in the past 3 deliveries. It always scared her a little to work without Tabby to back her up. Sure, she knew how to perform an emergency C-section, because she had assisted Tabby multiple times, but having a real live obstetrician ready to back her up was a safety net she didn't like to work without. 15 minutes later, she was sound asleep after a quick prayer for no deliveries for a day or 2. She wasn't sure she could handle more. Asterisk. Barry had his best sales day ever. People had realized he was in town before he'd married Sammy, but it seemed after going to his wedding and getting to know him a bit, a lot more people were willing to shop in his store. There was definitely a mentality of only wanting to buy from people who were familiar in the town. It was halfway through the morning when Bart came into the store, taking a seat beside his brother behind the desk. Barry finished ringing up his customer and turned to his brother. Sales are really picking up. Bart grinned. That's wonderful. I am really happy for you. But not for you? Barry asked, a frown on his face. Well, for me, too. I talked to Bob for a while yesterday, and as soon as I'm cleared to work, I have a job in his kitchen. He'll let me work starting at 6 in the evening until 10 at night, so I can work in the bookstore until it closes. Barry wanted to jump to his feet and pump his fist, but he knew his brother wouldn't be pleased with him for it. Any idea when you're going to be cleared to work? Bart shrugged. This was my worst concussion yet. My mind is going to be jello before too terribly long if I keep at it in the rodeo, so this is the best solution. Tabby thinks I should go to the hospital in Laramie to be checked out. She said she's not used to working with concussions. Then I'd go to Laramie. Do you need me to drive you? Maybe tomorrow? That way you can have a sign in your door all day saying that you're going to be gone. I'd hate for you to miss a ton of business because of me. I appreciate that, but your health comes first, Barry said. I need to head home at lunch today to take lunch to Sammy. She's had deliveries the past 3 nights, and she looks like she's about to fall over. What a way to honeymoon, Bart said, shaking his head. It must be fun to be married to a woman who knows so much about babies though, huh? Barry shook his head. I wish she was a secretary or something. Then she wouldn't always look like she was about to pass out. Oh, Tabby was one of those deliveries. She had a healthy boy. Bart smiled. That's awesome. Your wife is a superhero. She makes babies magically appear. Yes, she does. She's good at it, too. Well, I'm going to go up to your apartment and go back to bed. Barry shook his head. Your apartment. I'll have the rest of my stuff cleared out this weekend. We'll figure out rent later. Or I can take it out of your paycheck. Whatever you want. Works for me. Bart walked toward the door. See you tomorrow. We should probably go in the morning. Sounds good. Barry would have taken Bart at any time, and he was thrilled his brother had finally agreed to go to the hospital. Hopefully he wouldn't need to be admitted to the hospital and would just be given instructions on what to do. After he'd gone, Barry pulled up his book on his computer. It was his first chance to write since the wedding, and he was going to take advantage of it. He needed to start taking his book home with him at night for evenings when Sammy was out delivering, but he hadn't started yet. He didn't want to have to take it back and forth on a flash drive, so he did some quick research and chose a service where he could save the book onto an internet drive. That way he could write no matter what his location was. He glanced up when the bell over the door rang and smiled as Grace, Patience, and Felicity all came in. He had met all three of them at the reception, and he knew they ran the bakery in town. "How can I help you ladies?" "We're just looking for books," Felicity said. "I sure hope you're treating my favorite midwife well, because she's amazing and deserves to be treated like a princess, and if you don't treat her like a princess, I might have to gather a posse to come after you and cut your toes off one by one." Barry blinked. Was that all one sentence? It had sure sounded like one. "I'm barely seeing her at the moment. She keeps getting called out to deliver babies." He wasn't worried that the woman would get to his toes. Besides, he treated his wife as a man should. Grace walked in front of her cousin. "I heard Tabby had her baby, and it went well. We're all excited to see him." Patience nodded, moving next to Grace and turning her back on her sister, who had apparently lost her mind, again. "I'm sure it's hard on Sammy right now, with Tabby out of the picture. Tell her if there's anything non-medical people can do, we'll be there." "I'll tell her. Thank you." Barry was glad that the other two women weren't quite as bizarre as Felicity. "What kind of books are you looking for?" "Romance," Grace said. "The kind of stuff we weren't allowed to read when we were younger because our parents were insane." "You got anything good?" He laughed softly. "I will take you to the romance section. Sammy told me it needs help, and she's going to help me reorganize it as soon as she has time." He led the three women to the romances, noting that Felicity looked bigger than Tabby had. "When are you due?" 3 more months." Felicity turned to the side to show off her huge tummy. "I'm going to pop, huh?" He looked noticeably shocked. Are you supposed to be that big?" Patience and Grace both started laughing. "She's having twins," Patience explained. "Oh. I thought she was going to have the first 30-pound baby." Felicity shook her head. "Nope. My first was 8 pounds. I don't want these two to get any bigger than that." Barry decided not to say anything else on the subject. He was not an expert on pregnancies even though he was married to a midwife. "I'll let you ladies browse. Let me know if you need anything." "Just those flyers we've been promised," Grace said. "I'll have them to you by Monday, I hope." He looked at the three of them for a moment. "Who's watching the bakery?" "Ricky, our employee. We just took off for an hour so we could come check out the store." "We'll all work an hour late to make up for it," Patience said. Then I'll get out of your way so you can use your time off wisely." He walked back to his computer, thinking he could write a paragraph or two. As soon as he was sitting down, more customers came into the store. He was seriously surprised by the sheer number of people who were coming in this week as opposed to last week. Business was definitely improving. Asterisk. At lunchtime, Barry picked up 2 burgers, taking one home to Sammy. He woke her, and she moved to the table, yawning behind her hand. "I wish this wasn't so hard on you." "It goes with the job. Not a big deal." She reached for her burger and smiled. "Thank you for bringing lunch. Are you still going in this afternoon?" he asked. He wanted to add up the number of hours she'd slept, but he was afraid to. "I need to. We rescheduled a lot of people, but there are a few patients we just can't put off." "Don't worry. I've done this before, and I'm not dead." "I can see you're not dead, and I'm glad. But are you sure you're not hurting yourself by doing so much?" She shrugged. "I won't do any permanent damage. I promise." "I saw Felicity today." "Is she really only 6 months?" Sammy grinned and nodded. "She's having twins, and she carries high, which makes her look huge." "Well, I was worried she was having a 30-pound baby." "Nope, should be 2 7 or 8-pound babies. She's super healthy and doing great. I told her to lay off her own cookies for a bit or she'd gain too much, but she seems to have done so. It's so hard for any woman to do well, keeping her weight down while pregnant. I wasn't trying to comment on her weight. Do you think I offended her? Sammy shook her head. It takes more than that to offend Felicity. The girl is crazily awesome. She threatened to cut my toes off if I'm not kind to you. Sammy laughed. Sounds like Felicity. Once she likes someone, they are her person forever. She would protect me from anyone or anything, whether she had the chance of being injured or not. Wait until you try her cookies. They're like little pieces of heaven baked into a cookie. I might have to stop there and buy some. They sound fabulous. Do you have a favorite kind? She shook her head. Not at all, but it doesn't matter because I love them all. He got to his feet. I need to get back to the shop. I'm going to close tomorrow and take Bart to Laramie to get his head examined. He laughed at his own joke. She shook her head. Let me know what the doctor says. Oh. And he's going to work for me part-time and for Bob part-time. He's staying. Sammy jumped to her feet and threw her arms around him. I'm so happy he's staying. Barry kissed her. I sure wish I had more time with you, because I want a real marriage, but hopefully tonight will be our night. She smiled. I think I could find energy for that, if I got another nap. I'll plan on making supper, then. Don't expect anything fancy, but I'll cook while you nap. You're the best husband I've ever had. You've been married before? Not unless you count the boy I married in high school. It was a mock wedding, and my dress was beautiful. No, I don't count that. Not one little bit. Oh, then you're the only husband I've ever had. He kissed her softly. Have a good afternoon. And then he disappeared out the door. She was going to miss him. She hurried off to their bedroom to change into scrubs while saying a silent prayer there would be no more deliveries that day. Or the next. 2 days straight would be good. She loved what she did, but she needed sleep and some private time with her new husband. Was that too much to ask? When she got to the clinic, her first patient was waiting. How are you feeling, Hope? Hope shrugged. This is my second pregnancy, and everything seems to be just fine. Do I really need to come in every month? I think it's best if you do. As Sammy examined Hope Culpepper, she couldn't help but wonder what the other woman thought of her cousin, Felicity, who was proving to be bigger than a house. All right. I just hate leaving Linda with all the little ones. Hope yawned. I do wish there was more time to sleep. Me too. Hope grinned. I've heard the full moon brought you a run on babies. So many babies. And without Tabby to help. How's Tabby doing? Have they named the baby yet? They're calling him Wright after Frank Lloyd Wright. Seems a little odd to me, but that's Arch and Tabby for you. Their entire courtship was one practical joke after another. That's true, Hope shook her head. Felicity is so proud of how huge she looks. Is she wearing any kind of padding to look bigger? Sammy laughed. I don't think she needs padding. That woman is all baby. She seriously looks like she's about to explode. Baby and guts everywhere. I promise, she's not exploding yet. She's just big. Twins do that to a woman. Well, her baby bump is more of a baby mountain, and she has months to go yet. Yup. She's going to be just fine, though, and no, there's no padding at all. Sammy looked at Hope. You're 16 weeks. Do you want to take a peek and see what sex the baby is? I thought we couldn't do that until 20 weeks. Hope suddenly looked a great deal more awake, and she nodded emphatically. Carlin keeps telling me that he's only going to be fathering boys, and since the first was a boy, I have to prove him wrong. I want a girl. Can you spritz some girl mojo onto the wand? Absolutely. Lay back, and we'll make this happen. One of Sammy's favorite parts of her job was doing sonograms and letting people know if they were having a boy or a girl. I'm putting all the girl juju into this that I can. You're the best, Hope said, lying on her back and straining to see the monitor. Sammy went over different things, pointing out arms, legs, head. I'm not seeing what I would need to see for it to be a boy, so that leaves me only one possible conclusion. A girl. I'm so excited. In your face, Carlin Culpepper. I'm not sure that helping you fight with your husband over the baby's gender is part of my job description. Would you print out a view of between the legs with no tail, please? I can't wait to show him. Sammy laughed softly at the request, but she immediately did it, handing the printout to Hope after helping her sit up. Now you have proof that there's a girl on the way. Linda is going to be so happy. I know. I mean, she loves little boys, but she loves little girls, too. She is going to have a whole room full of Barbies, and she's the kind of grandma who will get down on the floor with them. Roy isn't going to know what hit him. Hope shook her head. I'm so excited. Well, I can't wait to hear what Carlin says. Will you text me after you've told him? Yes. Hope giggled. I'll probably take out a skywriter. Well, if you take out a skywriter, then text me before it flies over. I need to see his reaction. Oh, the whole world is going to know his reaction. Hope got to her feet and hugged Sammy. I'm so glad we peeked. Me too. Sammy watched as Hope hurried out of the office, thrilled with her reaction to finding out it was a girl. Experiences like that made all of the sleepless nights worth it. The rest of the afternoon flew by, and she finally went home, sagging onto the couch. She was so tired, but she was determined to stay awake and enjoy her evening with her new husband. Could she even call him a husband yet, since they hadn't done each other? She had no idea, but what else was she going to call him? She heard the door open, and Barry came in. I'm making nachos. I hope you like jalapenos. Love 'em. I'm just going to sit here and nap while you cook, unless you need me. Oh, I need you, but not to help me make nachos. Sleep. I want you rested for later. Sammy closed her eyes and drifted off to sleep, ignoring the sounds of him in the kitchen cooking. As long as she didn't have to cook, she would be one happy wife. Chapter 9. Sammy woke up with Barry leaning over her. Time to eat. I hope you're hungry. She sat up and wiped her eyes. Sure. Hungry. He shook his head. You're more tired than hungry. You really wipe yourself out, don't you? She shrugged. Comes with the job. Come eat. He led her to the table. My famous nachos. She looked at the table. He'd browned meat and added refried beans and cheese. There were chips, and she could see tiny pieces of chopped up jalapenos. It looked good. I can see why they're famous. She sat down. Do you want a Sprite? Or something else? Sprite sounds good. She yawned. And water. Get me both. You're being a little high maintenance. I'm sorry. But she didn't change what she wanted to just one. She wanted the Sprite, but she knew she needed the water. On days when she was going too much, she rarely got enough to stay properly hydrated. Barry came back to the table with the drink she'd asked for and a root beer for himself. He sat across from her and nodded to her nachos. How do you like them? I was waiting to try them until you came back to the table. I didn't want to be rude. She'd been tempted, though. They did look good. Try one. He shook his head, like she'd lost her mind. They're good. She opened her Sprite and took a sip. Thank you for cooking. I'm not sure you can count nachos as cooking. It's more than I could have done tonight. He told her about Bart deciding to stay in town as they ate. Does this mean we get a discount from Bob's? Barry laughed. No, but Bob will put a flyer in every to-go order and have one on every table. That's probably better than a discount. Awesome. Sammy kept eating her nachos. They really were good and not what she'd expected at all. She thought he'd just throw some cheese on chips and microwave them. This was infinitely better. After they'd finished eating, he sent her back to the couch. Sleep for a few more minutes while I get the dishes washed. You're doing dishes, too? I think you must be the most wonderful man ever. She kissed him quickly before doing as he'd told her and lying back down on the couch. Every minute of sleep she got at that moment was absolutely precious. When Barry finished with the dishes, he sat beside her, determined to let her sleep for another hour or so. She was curled into a little ball on her side, so there was plenty of room for him. He grabbed her remote and turned on the show he'd been binge-watching, making sure the volume was low. It was 2 hours later when she woke up and looked at him. I really did crash, didn't I? He nodded. But you needed sleep. All is good. He paused the show he was watching and turned to her. Feeling better? She nodded emphatically. Yes. Good. Because I have plans for the rest of your evening. She grinned, sitting up and moving toward him. Tell me about these plans. He wrapped his arm around her and brought her lips to his. I thought we could start with a little kissing. Oh. I like kissing. They sat together on the couch for 20 minutes, gently exploring one another as they kissed. It was leisurely, not as intense as usual. It was obvious Barry was half expecting to be interrupted at any moment, and he wasn't putting his heart into it. Do you think maybe it's time to move this party to the bedroom? She asked softly. Sounds great to me. He grabbed her hand and tugged her toward the bedroom. Maybe you should put your phone on mute. He was joking, but only sort of. He was determined that someone was watching and deliberately going into labor as soon as they started trying to husband and wife. She frowned. You know I can't do that. I do. I wish you could, but I understand. He pushed her down onto the bed and followed her down, kissing her madly, finally amping up the passion. Now that they'd actually made it to the bed, he was feeling optimistic that this would be able to make it to its natural conclusions. She was still wearing her scrubs from work, and he pulled her shirt off, silently thinking this was the furthest they'd ever gotten. It was probably time for the text. When there was no sound, he cupped her breasts in his hands, his thumbs finding her nipples through the sheer silkiness of her bra. When she moaned, he knew she was with him, and he rained kisses over the tops of her breasts that were visible through the bra before reaching behind her, unclasping it, and throwing it to the floor. For a moment, he just stared at what he'd uncovered before leaning down and taking one nipple into his mouth and sucking on it softly, his tongue toying with the tip. He stood up then and stripped off his own clothes, leaning down and divesting her of her scrub bottoms and panties. Covering her with his body again, he moved his hands all over her body. You all right? He asked softly. She nodded. So good. And that's when the sound came. He groaned and rolled to his back. I swear I'm going to kill that thing one of these days. She reached for her phone and read the text message. Carlin didn't believe me at first, and then he looked at the part of the sonogram you'd circled for him. He thinks you did it deliberately through some kind of sorcery. Sammy laughed and looked over at Barry, who was lying on his back with his arm thrown over his eyes, obviously frustrated. She moved over to him and started kissing him. After a moment, he pulled away. Not a delivery? Just a patient letting me know her husband's reaction to having a little girl instead of a boy. Does that mean we can finally finish what we started? Unless I get another text. He shook his head, laughing softly. It's laugh or cry at this point. I'd prefer to skip both and just make love. I can do that, too. Afterward, Sammy lay on her side, her head pillowed on Barry's shoulder. We didn't get interrupted, she said softly. He chuckled. I wasn't sure we'd ever make it through. Kissing her forehead, he added, the wait was so worth it. Well, I'm glad to hear it. She snuggled closer. I think I'm going to like being married. I know I will. He gathered her even closer, holding her. Maybe our rotten streak is broken now, and we won't get interrupted every time we start kissing. I sure hope so. And speaking of interruptions, I'm going to need to text Hope back. She's the one who texted you and almost made me die of anguish? Feeling a little dramatic this evening? She asked. He shook his head. Not at all. Feeling a little satisfied. Glad to hear it. She reached for her phone and quickly tapped out a response. Tell Carlin the gender is determined by the man. Now I have the munchies, he said. The munchies? What are you hungry for? No idea. He got out of bed. I'm going to go see what I can scrounge. You hungry? She shook her head. Not at all. Just tired. I think I'm going to shower really quick and sleep. He looked at his phone. It's only 8:30. I know, but if there are no deliveries tonight, I'm going to be well rested tomorrow. A well-rested wife sounds good to me. He wandered out of the bedroom in search of food, while she headed for the bathroom and her shower. Asterisk. Saturday morning, Sammy went to visit her new nephew, while Barry went to the store. When she got to Tabby's house, she was greeted by a very harried Arch. The baby wants nothing to do with me. He just wants to eat and sleep. That's pretty normal, Sammy told him. He doesn't need anyone but Mama for the first few months, and then Daddy becomes important. Arch frowned. But I want to be important now. Do you think he's mad at me for not being there when he was born? Sammy just laughed. Where are they? In the living room. He's nursing, and she's smiling contentedly. Sammy headed to the living room and found her sister and nephew exactly as Arch had said she would. Good morning. Tabby looked up with a grin on her face. Good morning. I have a baby. Sammy sat down beside her sister on the couch. How's he nursing? She asked. Beautifully. I was sure I was going to have to come to you for lactation help, but he's doing great. Sammy was a midwife and a lactation consultant, and she was proud to do both jobs. Most of the time, midwifery had to come first, though. I'm so glad he's doing so well. Sammy's arms ached to hold him, but he was nursing so well, she didn't dare even suggest it. Arch was mortified he missed the birth. He's convinced the baby is mad at him for not being there for it. Tabby giggled. I may have told him he'd have to do something to make it up to both of us. You're mean, Sammy said, grinning. He tried so hard to get here on time. I know he did, but he shouldn't have gone on that business trip. Did you tell him that before he left? Or did you wait until he'd missed the birth to start giving him advice about when to travel? Sammy knew her sister and how she was. She had a feeling about what the answer would be. Well, not until he got home, but he should have known not to travel. Tabby looked down at the baby again. His little cheeks are so soft. With all the babies I've delivered, you'd think he wouldn't be quite so amazing to me. Well, you did make and cook this one yourself. Little Wright finally stopped nursing, and Tabby offered him to Sammy. He's all yours if you want him. Sammy took him eagerly. How could you tell I was dying to play auntie and hold my nephew? It was written all over your face. I'm glad you're as excited as I am about him. There's no doubt. I'm glad one of us finally had a baby. You're up next. You two trying? Tabby asked. Sammy nodded. I want a couple of babies, and I don't think I should wait much longer if I want them to be healthy. They both knew the risks of having a baby when you were over 35. I'm sure you won't have any issues. And I'll help you out if you do. Sammy wrinkled her nose. She didn't want to have to take drugs that would put her at risk for multiples. I know. Thank you. How's married life? Good. Barry is absolutely amazing. Tabby smiled. You'll have to bring me some books from his store. You know what I like. She reached to her side and picked her purse up off the floor, pulling out $50. I'm going to have a little time to read while I'm home with him. I'm happy to do it. Sammy tucked the money into her pocket, careful not to dislodge the baby. Any deliveries this week? Other than mine, of course? Sammy laughed. 3 total. Every time Barry even thought of getting amorous, I'd get a text for another delivery. Tabby laughed. That's how it goes, doesn't it? But all babies were born happy and healthy. Sammy listed the other 2 mothers who had given birth during the week. Well, hopefully that won't always happen, but it will continue to happen. The whole situation has frustrated Arch more than once. It's what they signed on for when they married us, Sammy said with a shrug. I warned Barry, and I'm sure, well, you didn't get a chance to warn Arch, did you? I still can't believe all of you tricked me into marrying him. Well, you would never have gotten there on your own. You two were flirting forever. Tabby just shook her head, refusing to talk about it more. Arch came into the room then, frowning at Sammy. How come he let Sammy hold him and not me? Sammy was there when he was born. She caught him coming out, like you were supposed to. Tabby smiled sweetly at Arch, but it was obvious she wasn't going to let it go for a while. Sammy hoped that she and Barry never got to that point, but she'd never seen a married couple who didn't. And I'm his auntie, Sammy said with a grin. You guys did so good with this little guy. Arch smiled, walking over to her and looking down at his son. I still can't believe we made such a perfect baby, he said. Tabby laughed. The perfect half comes from me. He shook his head. You're a mess, Tabby O'Donnell. But I'm your mess now. You sure are. Sammy took that as her cue to leave. I'm going to run to the bakery and get some kolaches while I can. You guys need anything? Tabby shook her head. Just those books. For now, I'm going back to bed. Little Wright has been keeping me up all night every night. Eventually, he has to stop that. Sammy nodded. He will. She handed the baby to Arch as she got to her feet. He's going to love his daddy. Arch smiled and nodded. I hope so. Sammy let herself out, driving to the bakery. She got triple the number of kolaches she usually did and drove into town. She knew that Barry still hadn't tried them, and she wanted him to understand her love for kolaches. When she got to the bookstore, she was surprised that the little parking lot was full. Surprised, but happy. She walked to the door and saw that Barry was sitting at the desk ringing up a couple of customers. There were more waiting for him. Everyone in line was clutching multiple books. Sammy couldn't be more excited for him. She walked around the desk and sat in the chair beside him, setting the bag of kolaches on the counter. She had no idea how to ring people up, or she would have immediately started helping. Instead, as each person came to the front, she thanked them for coming and engaged in a bit of conversation. How did you hear about the bookstore? My sister just had a baby. She said her midwife married the man who owned the store the day of the birth, and she wanted everyone to be supportive of the store. I think she must have called 30 people at least. A group of us drove over from Haskell earlier today. I delivered the baby. Sammy grinned. I'm Sammy Ross. No, you're not. Barry protested. You're Sammy Hamilton. Sammy shrugged. Newlywed. I forgot. She'd considered keeping her last name, but he was very excited about it. She would have to take his last name after all. My sister said such amazing things about you, the woman told her. Would you take a patient from Haskell? Of course I would. Sammy smiled. You'd have to be able to drive to my clinic in time for the birth, though. It's not that far. I could do it. The girl grinned. I'll get your information from my sister and make an appointment. I just found out I was pregnant a couple of weeks ago. Well, I'll look forward to seeing you, then. Barry took the girl's money and bagged her books. You're bringing me customers, he said softly. I should have married you sooner. Sammy laughed. People just had to know you were here. That's the whole thing. Well, I guess they've figured it out. He checked out the last person in line and turned to her. What did you bring me? Collages. I think I told you about them. I got 4 different flavors for us to try. He dug into the bag and pulled out one of the little treats. It just looks like a hunk of dough. It's so much more than that. She bit into hers and showed him the insides. This one is sausage and cheese. I think it's my favorite except the bacon and cheese and the lemon-filled and the... Okay, I love them all. Barry bit into his collage and stared at it for a moment. This is good. Sammy nodded emphatically. They make them fresh every morning. I want to move into the bakery just for the collages. I think I could live off these things. He looked into the bag to see how many there were. So we each got 6. Sammy laughed. 4 for me and 8 for you. I think I love you, Sammy Hamilton. Just as he said the words, the door opened to the store, and in came Carlin and Hope Culpepper. Hope hurried over to Sammy. He's still not happy that it's a girl. He's going to fall in love with his little princess, though, isn't he? Of course he will. Sammy grinned at Carlin. I had nothing to do with the gender of your baby. Carlin wrinkled his nose. Okay, where are the mysteries? Barry jumped up and showed Carlin to the books he was looking for. What are you looking for? Sammy asked Hope. Romance. Carlin keeps me happy, but every woman needs just a little more romance in her life, doesn't she? I would think so. Sammy led Hope to the small romance section. Barry is going to beef up this section, based on my recommendations. Barry is a smart man. Chapter 10. Sammy spent the day at the bookstore with Barry, helping out with everything she could. She learned to run the POS system and helped shelving books. As trade-ins, he'd gotten a lot of romances, and she worked on expanding the romance area. By the time the store closed, she was tired. What do you want for supper? She asked as they headed out the door. She had a bag of books she would deliver to her sister the following day, tucked under her arm. Do you want to do the diner? Or Bob's? Or we could even head to Laramie for a meal. I don't think I should go that far from the clinic. Not when I'm the only one on call. It hurts that Tabby is out. I'm sorry, but we're stuck here in town. He shrugged. Let's do the diner, if you're all right with that. I don't want to cook, and I don't think you do either. Sammy grinned. I rarely want to cook. Then the diner it is. He led her to his truck. We'll pick yours up after church tomorrow, if that's all right. If you need to go anywhere tonight, it'll just be the clinic, right? She nodded. Right. And I don't have anyone else within 2 weeks of due date. We should be good. But just in case. No, I can understand that. When Tabby is working again, I'm taking you to Laramie for some Thai food. Sounds good to me. She got into his truck with him and leaned back in the passenger seat. We should grocery shop after we eat. The cupboards are getting bare. He nodded. I almost stopped one evening this week, but I wasn't sure what you usually buy, and I thought it would be better if I waited for you. Always better to wait for me. Mundane chores are better if we do them together. Once they were sitting at the diner, he glanced down at the menu. What's good here? She shrugged. Not sure. I get the same thing every single time. I'm a creature of habit, you know. I have noticed that about you. I'm surprised you don't just plan for the same meal every night. Mondays you have soup. Tuesdays you have grilled cheese. She tilted her head to one side. You know, that would make things easier. Maybe not every week the same, but how about we make up a menu tomorrow? We can hang it on the fridge, and whoever is home from work first can start cooking. Sounds good to me. Have you been writing in the evenings? He nodded. Some. I got a little done early in the week, and then the last couple of nights after you've gone to bed. I figure if I can get this book ready, it might make me feel better if the bookstore crashes and burns. The bookstore seemed to be doing great today. Are you still worried about that? A little, but not as much as I was. The word of mouth has been amazing. After they'd both ordered, she looked over at him. He'd told her he loved her right before they were interrupted. She felt the same for him, but did she tell him that now? Or did she wait for a more appropriate time? After a little deliberation, she decided to wait until they were home that evening. She wished she had more collages to give him as part of her declaration, but she'd think of something. After dinner, they went to the grocery store, and each of them grabbed items willy-nilly. It's how she liked to shop. When they were done, he frowned at their shopping cart. I think a menu will help us not buy a million things from the store, too. She shrugged. Probably. Are you usually organized about shopping? He shook his head. No, but I feel like I should be. Nah. It's more fun not to be. She grinned. I love getting home and being all excited when I open the bags that I bought and not remembering half of it. He laughed. I'm not sure that's the right way to do things. That's what I love about life. There's rarely one right or wrong way to do things. If you do them how it feels natural to you, then it's probably right for you. Interesting philosophy. I'll have to write a book about it someday, she said with a grin. As they were unpacking the groceries, he realized she was right. He looked at some of the things that came out of the bags and couldn't help but wonder what they'd been thinking purchasing them. Why did we buy Jell-O? I bought lime Jell-O for a lemon cake. I try to always have that on hand in case there's a surprise wedding and I need to take a dish. Or a surprise anything. We have lots of pop-up potlucks around here. What on earth is a pop-up potluck? Well, it's when someone calls and says, we have an event tomorrow. Everyone is bringing a dish. If they don't tell me I can't bring dessert, then I take a lemon lime cake. And if they say you can't bring a dessert? I always keep a frozen shepherd's pie in the freezer in the garage. I defrost and bake. Then I have my potluck dish ready. He grinned. And you say you aren't organized? Only about pop-up potlucks. Nothing else in my life is half as organized. I have a hard time believing that. She shrugged. Believe what you will. I'm really not organized at all. I suppose. Sammy put the last thing into the fridge and walked into the living room. Grocery shopping is done for the week. I think we should watch a movie. I like watching movies with you. She laughed. No, I mean really watch a movie. We've never done that before. He frowned. I can always think of parts of you I'd like to be touching during movies. You're an absolute mess, Barry. I think that's why I love you so much. He stared at her for a moment. Really? You love me? I wouldn't have married you if I wasn't already half in love with you. And then you were so wonderful about me being called away over and over this week. I guess that cemented it for me. I'm so glad we're married. He wrapped his arms around her, resting his cheek on the top of her head. I love you, too, Sammy. She stayed like she was for a moment, just glorying in the feel of him and knowing he loved her. I guess I knew what I was talking about when I walked into the bookstore announcing I loved you. Of course you did. I have a store named Barry's Books. And soon, it will have lots more romances. He grinned, kissing her head. It sure will. My sweet little Sammy is going to take care of that for me. You just show me where you order your books from, and I'll take care of it. He sighed happily. Everything seems to be going my way. I have a wife to love, I'll hopefully soon have a kid or two to love, and my brother is moving to town to work with me. I would say everything is coming up roses. You really do like that movie Gypsy, don't you? Yes, I really do. He smiled. It was one of my mom's favorites, so I got to know it well. When am I going to meet her? She asked. He sighed. I want to say never, but that's not fair. She has the right to know she has a new daughter-in-law. I'll call her and see what she says. That would be great. She grinned at him. I will introduce you to my parents eventually, too. You will? She nodded. I guess I should call them and tell them I'm married. I was planning to Monday night, but everything got all crazy with deliveries. Do you think the full moon is why we got married? He asked. She laughed. Absolutely not. I think we got married because we had feelings for each other, and because you couldn't keep it in your pants. I guess I should work on that, shouldn't I? Everyone should. Epilogue. 10 months later, it was Sammy's turn to be on the delivery table. You're doing great, Sam. Wright's going to have a cousin any minute now. Tabby told her. Barry was at her side, mopping the sweat off her forehead. I'm glad you're here for this, she told him just as another contraction hit her. Dallas stood ready to bathe the baby as soon as it emerged. I'm so happy you invited me to be part of this. She was very swollen with child as well, due in only a few weeks. Push, Sammy. You can do it. Tabby said, her hands out and ready to catch the baby as it emerged. 20 minutes later, Barry and Sammy were left alone with their new daughter. She's perfect, Sammy said for the 20th time. No matter how many births I've been through, my little girl is the most beautiful baby on the whole planet. Barry smiled. I wasn't expecting her to be quite so gray. It's the vernix. It'll be gone soon, and she'll be nice and pink and ready to take the world by storm. Just like her mama? Absolutely. Sammy laid back on the bed, still cradling the baby against her. Do you want to hold her? Barry had never really held a baby, but he nodded. I'll try. Just be sure to support her head and hug her against you. You'll do just fine. To his surprise, Sammy was right. Holding his little girl this way was the most wonderful thing he'd ever done. Thank you for giving me such a beautiful little girl. Sammy smiled, tears filling her eyes as she watched father with daughter. I love you both so much. Barry looked at her with awe. I love you, too. I can't believe we grew this beautiful baby all on our own. She's a true child of love.